our next speaker, which is Maria Tengö from the Stockholm Resilience Center. She's a doctor in natural resources management and coordinating international research projects in India and South Africa. And she works transdisciplinary with a focus on social ecological resilience and endogenous processes for transformational change at a local level and in a poverty context. So, please, Maria.
So thank you very much, and it's an honor to be here. It's also very nice to see a lot of familiar faces and less familiar faces in the audience. So I would like to start with asking all of you here in the audience to visualize for yourself a benefit that you perceive from ecosystem. Just take a few seconds, think about the first thing that comes to your mind. So I'm not a mind reader, of course, so I don't know what you thought about. Although I'm willing to bet my lunch that you did not think about the coffee you just drank. You also did not think about that actually there was no flooding in your basement this morning. But I think it's quite likely that you were thinking more of kind of this intangible benefits, that you were thinking about how you enjoy walking the dog in the forest or taking a jog along the beach, or just, for me, myself, it would be swimming in the Baltic. So these are kind of more the intangible parts of ecosystem benefits and often kind of non-material. And they're usually referred to as cultural ecosystem services. And they have been defined as the non-material benefits people obtain from ecosystems through spiritual, for example, spiritual enrichment, cognitive development, reflection, recreation, and aesthetic experience. So you see, this is kind of quite a mix of kinds of things. And also identity and sense of place also is added in there. As I said, so this kind of non-material benefit is quite challenging to put a value on, to quantify, and thus to kind of add into models that you can present for decision makers. However, that does not mean that they're not important for governance of ecosystems and the services they generate. Another kind of way of thinking about this is proposed in a very recent paper by Chan et al. In Bioscience, that most ecosystem services, cultural and otherwise, have non-material or intangible dimensions to it. And what I will talk about today is I will not contribute to solving the issue of how to better incorporate cultural ecosystem services into kind of models or ecosystem assessment, but rather to hopefully illustrate how cultural ecosystem services can influence or interact closely with other ecosystem services and governance of ecosystems. And I will do that by talking about some case studies, one from that me and colleagues from Stockholm Resilience Center has been working with. And all of them, in all these case studies, we're trying to kind of, in an integrated way, study ecosystem service generation and the social aspects that influence ecosystem services. And the case studies are rural rainfed agriculture from southern Madagascar, urban trees in Bangalore, India, and urban green spaces in Stockholm, Sweden. So I'll start with Madagascar, that I've been working on for several years myself. And this case is in the at the very southern tip of Madagascar, where we have been addressing ecosystem service in a subsistence production landscape. So this is a satellite image. It's the infrared band, so the dark patches you see are dense forest. And they're surrounded by agriculture, small-scale rain-fed agriculture, and seasonal pastoralism. And what we wanted to do here is then to what kind of ecosystem services are, or not what kind, but how are these forest patches generating ecosystem service for local livelihoods? And it is also the case that this area is a biodiversity hotspot, so it's very high levels of endemism, both on kind of among plants and animals. It's a dry spiny forest ecoregion, and it has some charismatic lemur species and several red-listed endangered species like the radiated tortoise there. It's also one of the poorest regions of Madagascar, and it's often drought-stricken. So to start with the assessment of ecosystem services, we decided to focus on pollination of beans as a critical crop for local livelihoods. They provide an essential source of protein that are consumed daily. So we found in our empirical investigations that more than 50%, so there is a pollination effect on bean yields on this species, so we got a 50% increase, and that the forests are providing essential habitats for pollinators in this landscape. We also found that bee farmers would locate their fields closer to forests, their bean fields closer to forest compared to wind pollinated crops such as maize. And when doing kind of a simple modeling exercise and add a zone of pollination, like a radius around each forest patch, based on literature estimates, we found that the cover of pollination service is quite high in the landscape, based on how the forests are scattered across. So we also wanted to address the regenerative capacity of the forest in this quite fragmented landscape. So we looked at connectivity for seed dispersal among the forest patches, and we focused on a key seed disperser, the ringtail lemur, who moves across the landscape, and we used a graph theory method to assess connectivity. And as you see here, that if you assume, which is a good assumption, that the lemur kata can move around 1 kilometer, the area is actually quite well connected. However, our studies also found that both the pollination and seed dispersal is very vulnerable to further loss of forest patches. And then, oh yes, so there you see, indicating the vulnerability of this connectivity. So there's also quite strong pressure on these forest patches. There's very little access to fuel wood and building materials, etc. in the landscape. So then a conventional approach to address this would be to kind of map the forest, to identify vulnerable areas, and to kind of think about ways to in an efficient way, assign protection. And as this is a quite remote area, so enforcement would be very expensive. A reasonable way would be to try and arrange for local committees to manage these forests and pay local forest guard, etc. However, as many of you in the audience know, is that this is not needed in this case, because all the patches here that range in size from a couple of hectares to up to 90 hectares are protected by local taboos. And that actually works well than, I think, most parks in this country, in Madagascar. So, and to kind of understand that picture, that there is a layer of kind of protection already that's based on a spiritual belief that these forests are hosting the ancestors that are in turn protecting the community well-being. It's essential to understand the dynamics and vulnerability of this ecosystem services. Oh yes, so it's important to also see the people in this picture. So that's how we were working in this project, along with ecosystem assessment, also analyzing and trying to understand the mechanisms within these forest governance systems and how it's related to the beliefs. And I don't have the time to go very much in depth with this, but I then suggest that the better way to represent the vulnerability of this ecosystem services is to include other things than ecological connectivity. And so here what you see, the green lines and the green dots are the forest and the connectivity. And the red dots are where the social clans that are in charge of the forest are based. So for each forest, there's one forest, there's a patch, there's one or a few clans that are engaged in management and monitoring and enforcement. And the red lines, so that's the blue lines linking the red dots with the forest. And then the red lines are the social networks that actually maintain the governance system that's needed. So you see here that to understand the generation with the ecosystem service, the pollination service, you need to think about the social as well as the ecological factors. And just to summarize that, I use this model from a book from 2003 by Berks, Holding and Folke, that illustrate the linkages between social and ecological system. And here we see the ecosystem service pollination in this case. The outcome of that actually, it matters both the aspects of the local ecosystem, but then the management practice of maintaining this taboo forest, maintaining and enforcing them, and how that's embedded in knowledge and local knowledge in institutions. So, okay, this is a quite remote area. It's an indigenous group quite far away, and there's few external drivers. So is this really valid in our contemporary society today? So to answer that, I'm going to take you also to Bangalore, which is a really growing city in India, where the inhabitants are kind of exposed to all the aspects of modern life today. So Bangalore is a city of 9 million people in south-central India, and it's rapidly transforming from the garden city that it was known as to the Silicon Valley of India, or the IT hub of Southeast Asia. And what is suffering in this transformation is trees. So you see here how trees are cut for widening roads, and also for the intense development of the IT areas in the suburbs. And this is an article saying that the city has lost 2/3 of this vegetation in 4 decades. So there are rules to protect actually trees from cutting. So as trees are generating, we heard from Åsa, urban ecosystem services are really essential. It's good so they provide air quality and they regulate heat island effects, etc. And tree is a key structure in the city for that. There are rules to regulate that, but they're not really enforced. And the only rule that actually work here are the sacred trees. So as if trees are considered sacred, they will not be cut. So we wanted to investigate this further. What does this layer of informal protection mean, and how is it working? So this is ongoing research, and we are still kind of analyzing the data. But we're mapping sacred trees in 6 sites, and we identified sacred trees as they were marked by cultural practices. And what we find is that the sacred trees provide pockets of protected green cover in the highly urbanized landscape. And they are often large with wide canopies compared to other street trees and park trees. And 97% of the sacred trees, are native to southern India. And also there are cultural practices that maintain continuity of trees. So if a tree dies, then there will be plantations of a new one. So this is just an image showing where the location of sacred trees, but also this image that shows that when the trees are part of a sacred site, that means that there's also protection of the larger temple site. Okay, so this is another case study, and it shows that this kind of informal protection that's based on spiritual beliefs can and actually do protect urban green spaces and the ecosystem services that they generate. And it's interesting as actually there's a very strong urbanizing driver, which means that the proportional importance of this kind of protection is increasing. So both these case studies have strong kind of belief component in them. So I would like to end with an example where there's more in a more kind of secular setting. And this is a study that colleagues of mine at Bayer and SRC did a couple of years ago. They were comparing 3 kinds of ecosystem services: pollination, pest control, and seed dispersal, and in 3 different kinds of areas: city parks, cemeteries, and allotment gardens. So, and they got mixed results on seed dispersal and pest control. But for bumblebees, as a proxy of pollination capacity, they got much higher abundance in allotment areas. And then along with this, they also investigated then what are the management practices and why are there differences in management practices. And what they found was, again, that there were kind of cultural or social aspects of sense of place, local ecological knowledge, or protective norms among the managers of these 3 different sites that influenced how the areas were managed for these ecosystem services. So this also then shows that even in a kind of then more secular settings, this kind of social or cultural values are interacting with ecosystem service generation. So to conclude, I would like to hope that that I illustrated to you that the cultural and social factors are kind of strongly interacting with other ecosystem services, and the governance indirectly and directly the governance of ecosystems and the services they generate. And I suggest that a socio-ecological systems approach is actually needed to really assess and understand the dynamics of ecosystem services generation. And this is particularly crucial in agriculture, to human-dominated landscapes such as agriculture or urban systems that also talked more about. And it's essential to recognize the role of the management practices, the knowledge, the institutions, as I gave you examples of, but actually also to see the people behind these that are enforcing them and manifesting their values in practice. And my kind of then advice for thinking about how can we improve reconnection to the biosphere through ecosystem services, which is kind of the overarching theme for this session, is to think about cultural ecosystem services as showing a potential on focusing on the positive connections between people and ecosystems that can enhance stewardship or actually sustainable management of ecosystems. And to just end with some research needs, the first point relates to, I think, hopefully, what Gary will talk about. So how does cultural ecosystem services relate or shape bundles of other ecosystem services? And the second one would be that we better need to understand actually the ecology of ecosystem services. It has been kind of treated as a little bit of a black box, but in what ways does actually ecosystem processes contribute to spiritual enrichment, cognitive development, and aesthetic experiences? And what is the role for cultural ecosystem services for catalyzing collective action and change towards ecosystem-based management? So I didn't tell you that, but in India, it's a strong movement for protecting urban trees, and there's demonstrations and websites, etc., to protest. And then lastly, what are kind of interesting case studies and experiments, etc., that we need to evaluate and assess, and further think about how can we actually build on people's values and preferences, these kind of positive connections between people and the environment. So not just regulate and mitigate the negative effects that we have on ecosystems, but actually build on the positive connections. Thank you.
Thank you, Maria, for this interesting take from your field studies. And does anyone have any questions specifically concerning this talk now for Maria? Yes, please. Just a moment.
Yes, I wonder if you could clarify at various points you use the term governance, and sometimes you talk about management of ecosystem services. And I know that in the domain in which many of us work, people talk about governance, and I don't think any two people ever agree on what it means. Can you tell us how you're using it?
Yes, I mean, I would think of governance as different from government. So different ways that people are arranging and regulating their activities in relation to nature. So that would include informal management as well as formal. So informal rules and norms as well.
Thank you. Anyone else? Yes?
Hi, my name is Pat, and I'm from the SRC. And I was wondering if you have any ideas about how spirituality is changing or adherence to beliefs is changing with processes of urbanization, and then with the consequences of reduced sacred groves or so forth.
Simple answer, no. But I think it's a very interesting question to address. Actually, I mean, there has been quite a lot of studies showing that, okay, so sacred sites matter for biodiversity, for ecosystem services, etc. And it's generally the idea is that it's in decline. But there's been very little studies on actually sacred urban nature. So this is something that we would like to go into further. And of course, I mean, there's also example of saying in India that the spirituality is changing, that people rather go, into gym than walking in the park, etc. But yeah, this needs to be investigated further.
So one more question before we go to the next speaker. The lady over here.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank you for an interesting presentation. I thought I would hold my questions to the end, but I suspect there's going to be not that much time. Bangalore. I live and come from there. So,
Okay.
So it seems to me, I mean, as much as the sacred trees and the relationship between sacred trees and small temples and worship and so on are there, I think there are 3 positive things and then one huge negative thing, which sort of makes all of this, to me, very sort of minor in relation to those. The positive things are the following. Historically, the big land in Bangalore, in the city of Bangalore, that is protected and that serves as green lung, is in fact the land that is with the churches and the land that is with the military, the defense land. And that's where there are huge tracts of land, lots of, unused land, etc. Now, the churches are managing to hold on to their land for a variety of reasons. What's happening with defense land, because, and this is the huge negative, is there is in cities in Bangalore, as there is in a lot of rapidly growing cities in India, and I suspect in a lot of other places, China, Sub-Saharan Africa, and so on, the biggest mafia is in land, construction, and they control just about everything that happens in the city. Land, construction, waste, and so on. And the military now in Bangalore, because they're so becoming afraid of these guys being able to take their land away from them on this or that or the other grounds, has started, in fact, building on what have been these wide open tracts of land. So I think we have, in the context of this, a huge issue of urban governance. And going back to Roger's question of what is governance, this is our governance challenge in spades in cities of this kind. And just one thing, the one positive that's been working on the other side, and that's why you showed that April 2012 newspaper cutting. If we were protecting our trees like this, we wouldn't have lost as much as we've lost. And what happens is the mafia now has learned how to do this. They come on the weekend and they just chop everything down. They will go down the whole street with the most advanced technology, and the trees are gone before you can get a court order to stop them from doing it. So it's happening on that kind of scale. The only one positive that I would say is that in recent times, and this is actually the middle class that has been involved in this, is they've been complaining that there's nowhere for us to go for our morning walks. And so there's a kind of urban parks and stuff movement, which all sorts of equity issues and so on involved, but at least small green lungs are being created. So I think, I'd just like your comment on how we deal with what to me is the biggest governance issue in cities.
Thank you. Maria.
Well, just a small comment that I think, of course, I'm just presenting it is very small and indeed not the most important aspect in any way of governance of urban green spaces in Bangalore, for sure. But I used it to kind of illustrate the point that maybe we actually need some kind of mind shift in how we think about ecosystem services and governing them. So not only regulating and focusing on the negative impact, but there's actually, I think there's great potential in focusing on the positive impact on what people do care about, really. But thanks a lot for adding more richness to the case. And I'll be very happy to talk more about that.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Maria.